this piece to me, like, is partially about vulnerability. My biggest, the thing that I fear most is like, when my eyesight is like covered, that is like one of the biggest like triggers of like very bad anxiety for me. So I wanted to make sure that my eyes were covered because it takes like a lot of trust and vulnerability that like everything is going to like be okay, and that like, you know, having like people with scissors like right next to my body. Like I use rope kind of just like as this like signifier of like distance, and then like cutting away at like distance and cutting away at like barriers between people. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's kind of what that was about. But yeah, any like first impressions or anything? The piece is about STI stigma. I was diagnosed with herpes like a year and a half ago, and it was a very emotionally traumatic experience for me. And it's interesting because it's like such a common thing, right? There's definitely people in this room with it. Yeah, to me, it's been about like my process coming out of that and like addressing the way that like medical bias like manifests in our body, and that how like our experiences we have with like doctors and things like that manifest in our interpersonal relationships. So.
And how does that? How does it manifest?
Sorry?
How does it manifest? Like what examples or experiences you've had?
Like shame, right? Because like ultimately like it's just like the way, like how I was like treated when I first received, like when I first like got my diagnosis, and like how people like treated me in my personal life, like reflected back in like how I viewed my own body and like the way that I was negotiating like romantic and sexual relationships.
And there's also about the concern that you have for contamination.
Yeah.
Is that also?
Yeah, no, that is another big thing, is like talking about like navigating like sexual relationships after, and like fear, like my own personal fears of like what will happen, like how will someone react if I do give it to them. And that was like another big thing that I was thinking about. So. Hey.
That was great job.
Thanks.
Thank you. So yeah, just to piggyback on the first question, if you're comfortable talking about it, like I feel like doctors just do a really bad job.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was part of the trauma, or like that's part of what you were exploring in this performance.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that.
Yeah, partially. That's ultimately like what I want to work towards, and like also talking about the way that like medical language kind of also manifests in the body. For this, I was mostly thinking about like, as I begin to like recover from like my own internalized stigma and shame, and like how I'm navigating relationships after that. So.
So like the preparation for what is next.
Yeah.
I think well, this was beautiful, thank you. I was really drawn to the presence in the space with you, the person holding you.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were sort of talking about vulnerability, it like just that sort of presence, that very caring presence in the space with you seems to sort of really in conversation with that vulnerability.
For sure.
Sort of like the way that we navigate care and vulnerability together.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to talk about it in a post words, that was, I just am interested in your choice to work when they're holding you.
Yeah, for sure.
Even as like this like potentially dangerous thing is coming through you.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like as an STI positive person, I feel like in like sexual health discourse, a lot of the like burden is placed on like the STI positive individual to like be the one who's like while I obviously like support disclosure, like the language is always like, how am I keeping everyone safe around me, rather than like how is this like an exchange, right? Like how are our bodies in communication with each other when we're like in romance or in sex? And like, for example, like I wish that there were more conversations about like how to receive an STI disclosure, like how to communicate with someone lovingly if they tell that to you, or like how to do your research on your own. You know, I feel like the burden is always on like the person who has the STI to like educate everyone, keep everyone safe. Like it's always like all on that person. So I do feel like I want to see like a little bit of a shift where there's a bit more of a mutual conversation between two people, like regardless of STI status. So I like the idea of having another person with me who's like caring and like in exchange with my body. So yeah.
That's so interesting too. I think for all the reasons that you just named, that even getting to a stage where thinking about discourse is so hard, right? So it's almost like preparing for what's next is a really, really advanced stage of the trauma that you go through.
Yeah.
Or at least that I can speak from my experience. And coming out of that, which is why I feel like the cutting and the tape and hearing that process
Yeah.
was so important, is because that's the first, I feel like that kind of could signify the first coming out of even just this complete darkness of awful emotion around it.
Yeah, for sure. When I first started working on this piece, I was still like in a lot of like the shame around my diagnosis. So a lot of the work that I was doing was like under a blanket. I was doing a lot of performances where I was like completely under a blanket, like no one could see me. And now like I wanted to have like more of my body shown. And I also wanted to like think about like signifiers of risk, because like I want us to have a bigger conversation about like risk and like what it means in each situation and how it's navigated and how it's negotiated between people. And I really like the idea of using caution tape, because like caution tape itself is not a risk, but it's a signifier of risk, right? So.
And it's also protecting you too.
Yeah. Well, also like STI positive people also like, it's not just like us who are the threat, right? Like we deserve, we all like need our own care, right? Like we deserve like sexual pleasure, and we also deserve like to have our health discussed, right? Like we're not just the threat. So it also is like protecting me. Yeah.
Now, you work in a number of modes and modalities. Can you talk a little bit about the score, the sound?
Yeah. So the score was like some ambient sounds that I was kind of like thinking about, and then also the scissors were being sent through reverbs that were of like real spaces, like particularly like old churches. So I kind of wanted to have like, I kind of wanted to re-sonify these objects and this like cutting through like institutions where like there was like a birth of like a lot of different stigmas and things like that. And I also have the frequency of this like sound changing as the piece like progresses, because I wanted the sound to like be reflective of like what was going on around me with the cutting. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I keep thinking about this like you're emerging from this like shame chrysalis or like cocoon or something.
Yeah, that's like definitely where I am. So yeah.
I mean, I think it takes a lot of courage to sort of like make yourself the piece, especially in the context of something where, you know, you're kind of, you have this tension between like care and risk and danger and like tenderness, right?
Yeah.
Like you're the whole thing. Like that's what we're watching the entire time.
Right.
And so this isn't, you know, a question or anything so much as just like a feedback.
Yeah, it was scary. I was scared the whole
I was
time.
scared.
Yeah, I was scared because people were like, I had no idea what was going on. So I still don't know what happened.
I
So
felt it. I feel like there's also, you know, and I know we've talked about this too, there's like an emotional kind of regeneration that happens with this kind of work. And
yeah.
that's kind of like the unspoken, I guess, material.
Yeah. Yeah.
The scissors that kind of finish opening the rest of the tape weren't light.
Sorry.
They weren't mic'd, they didn't run through the same reverb, or if they did, it wasn't noticeable. What was the thinking between mic'd for some and not for those?
Oh, you mean the tape that the scissors that cut off my tape? Oh, yeah. So I wanted that to be more of like kind of like a tender undoing, and I didn't want it going through like reverberations of like institutions that like have like birthed some stigma. So that was intentional. Yeah.
Thank you for the amazing thing. I was always thinking about your said about the more mutual relationship with other people. Like I kind of reflect on this performance at the beginning, like when I grabbed the scissor and cut the rope. Actually, I'm so nervous because I don't know what is my action relating to you decisional action.
Right.
So there is like my concern all the time if we cut the rope, too slow, too quick. Is there anything different for you, or is there anything is not good for you, or what is your next decision and actions? So the whole concern is like it's really dragged me to the performance because I know there is assuming because we cut whole road and you gotta be safe by get released to all those things and my people don't finish it, what happened next? So it's like always concerned about you and also our relationship to you, like really intention in the road thing. This really leading way, like connect your body and really grab the rope, like should I be gentle, should I, like those mutual relationships immediately viewed by just simple instruction like cut the rope with a scissor.
Right.
So it's really amazing and just really perfectly to reflect your concept about more mutual relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
And there is a curious question. Is there any delay for the scissor sounds? 'Cause I'm not sure it's part of the score. Because there is some sound we cut it and maybe 30 minutes later,
Yeah.
the sound is coming out.
Yeah, so I think that was like lag on my computer. Yeah, yeah. There was like some pre-delay, and there was also a decay, but I noticed that there was something like kind of off there. But I figured just keep it the way that it was.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I think that part is also amazing because sometimes we do, like, interact with people, but at the minutes we do the thing, but we don't know, what is that meaning for the decision. So the delay between is like really sometimes scary, but sometimes it's you're doing the magic things between two people. So I think the delay part is also really good.
Yeah, that's excellent feedback. I hadn't thought about it that way. Thank you.
Meredith, I'm struck by the dichotomy of having your body in the hands of both a caretaker and a room full of
Yeah.
strangers. Your decision to sonify the scissors. And I think my question is about like the embodiment of those two bifurcations, like this split within you, and then this kind of escalating, like as the score passed, it got more tense and more tense.
Yeah.
And if in your mind for that composition there was like a resolve that was planned, or not planned at all,
Yeah.
or like a meeting of those two.
There was a resolve. So the music was supposed to turn off, but it didn't. So, yeah, so it was supposed to resolve. It was supposed to turn off, and then the cutting would be like completely silent without like the sonification of like, well, not, yeah, without like the sonifying of like the what I saw as like kind of just like the destruction of like distance between people and the destruction of risk. So it was like once that was complete, then the rest of like the stuff was supposed to come on. So that was like supposed to happen, but it didn't. So gotta look into that. Yeah.
Were you hoping for a resolve? Like is the piece trying to resolve strangers and like a caretaker?
That's a good question. Yeah, I have to think about that. Yeah.
Are there any
Well, I don't know what happened, so I feel like I have to know what happened, and then I can find out.
I don't know what's happening ever, so.
Yeah.
Well, we're very fortunate because with our partners, the Monira Foundation, this was videotaped.
Yeah,
So you
I
get
can
to
find
see
out.
what
Yeah.
happened. And it's part of the research. That's the whole purpose of Open Lab.
Yeah. This is definitely like just a part of what it will eventually be. So I wanted to like test out ideas.
Yes.
I'm really wondering, and this is a conversation that has been had in the HRV community.
In what?
In the HRV community,
Yeah.
particularly. And so I'm curious how you might, since this is, it sounds like this is a work in progress, but.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Very much so. Yeah.
So some states have actually tried to criminalize transmission of HIV.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering how do you see that influencing the signal patient and what you're doing with your work here?
The what?
The criminalization of HIV, for example, the transmission of STI.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think that might shape what you're doing here in the work? Right? Because that then the state, this entity, this political entity, is then making folks who have an STI a defendant, like they're
Right.
criminalizing the person when there's no evidence of criminal intent, so.
Right.
I'm curious about your thoughts on that shape.
For sure. Yeah, I've thought a lot about like what my scope is with like STIs, and for me, like it's been hard to not speak about from my own experience, because while the incurable STIs like HIV, HPV, and like herpes are all like kind of like lumped together, and yet they have they're so different, like the way that they manifest in the body is so different, and also like the history, right? Like the history is just completely different. So I have not thought about that yet for this piece, because I want to be really careful, like not to speak to experiences that aren't my own, and I feel like I can't speak to like the criminalization of HIV, and I also can't speak to like the genocidal history of that. So, but that is something that I want to think about, like for the final piece, is like how to have it more like broadly encompassing just like the general STI community. So I would definitely like love feedback on that for in the future, or yeah.
I mean, I do think it's fair to think about why would HIV be criminalized if not others?
Right.
It's very arbitrary.
Yeah.
And so I think it is. I think your experience does shed light on some dichotomies there between different issues. Because even the language around like gay men are notorious for like dropping like words like clean,
Dirty.
Right. And it's like, well, it's like, oh no, I'm clean because I take a shower.
Right.
I'm not dirty.
Right. That is definitely something that I want to work to incorporate more into the piece, is like the way that we talk about STIs, right? So like this is something that like that's language I used before I knew, before I was like educated on like how like stigmatizing that language is, was like when you say you tested clean, like what does that mean for someone who is STI positive, right? So that's another thing that I want to start thinking about.
And it seems like we're also living in a moment where we need to find a blame. I remember 2 years ago when we were looking for the original culprit of COVID.
Right.
And we blamed an entire country and population.
Right.
And I remember during HIV, like the pilot who was diagnosed, and we blamed the transmission. Yeah. We tend to fall into that trap more quickly than ever because of communication is happening even more rapid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we fall into that with STIs too a lot, because like a lot of people will ask me, especially in like dating situations, like who did you get it from, right? Because it's like and like granted, like this is something that I've fallen into the trap of, but I'm starting to think of like mindfully having that conversation more now, is like there's like people always want like someone to blame, right? Or it's like I was pure until this person came, and like soiled me, right? So it's like I think it does, like perpetuate this like blame game. Like, who did you get it from? So.
One more question? Yeah. Would anybody like to close this out?
I think that's just making me think about the idea of like containment and this need to identify the source.
Yeah.
Feels like an effort to insist on the like solid boundaries of the body.
Right.
Right, which like bodies are much more porous than we want to believe, right? Like,
Right.
if we sit here wearing masks.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
we are very aware that bodies are much more porous than we want to believe them to be, and that feels super present here in this
Yeah.
work, is like really strict boundary that you're drawing around your body, which I think is again is why I'm so interested in the person that's getting with you,
Mm.
but is still outside of that boundary, right? So,
Right.
and is interacting in that with that boundary in really interesting ways and less stigmatized ways, maybe like through the sound. Yeah, I'm interested in the idea of like boundaries and porousness.
Sure.
And how you see that happening here, or like how you're engaging with thinking about those ideas.
I have to think about that, but
Yeah.
that's like a really good thing to think about is like boundaries, right? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.